the first-party PlayStation franchise, Everybody's Golf has gone multi-platform for the very first time, meaning it's on Nintendo, and this feels weird. The franchise's original developer Clap Hands is nowhere to be seen, but they were very funny, because on launch day for this game, Clap Hands updated their own golf game to be 60 frames per second on the Switch 2. Now, of course, this was a workaround. They don't seem to have Switch 2 kits, so basically they updated the Switch 1 game with a 60 FPS toggle in the graphics settings, and for the most part, that works incredibly well. It does dip a little bit when you're running to your ball, but in the actual gameplay, it holds a rock-solid 60 all the time, so this is fantastic. You can, of course, also enable this on the Switch 1 because it's just a Switch 1 level patch, and it spends most of the time around 40 FPS, so it is still best to lock it at 30 when playing on Switch 1, but fantastic on Switch 2. Anyway, we reviewed the PlayStation 5 version of Everybody's Golf Hot Shots, and for the most part, we were rather positive about the game, although we did mention the performance issues it has. That version rather ambitiously has a 120Hz mode, but it never gets close to that figure, usually being around 70 frames per second, but some courses under certain weather conditions go way below that, hovering around 40 to 45 frames per second, which does not feel good and does affect your swinging. So if PlayStation 5 has performance issues, how does the Switch 1 and Switch 2 fare? Well, first off, the game still has a graphics option in the menus, but unfortunately there's just one toggle here, and it's for dynamic resolution scaling. Interesting, but definitely not the biggest issue with this version of the game, and even with this setting turned off, there's still some rather blurry stuff, like the preview cam here, either showing your golfer or your caddy. It's really blurry. But I'd say the visuals are, for the most part, fine. There's definitely some drab lighting in this game, but that's true of both versions. But under ideal lighting conditions, it looks okay. The trees are less full, the resolution definitely could be higher, but it looks fine. The real problem though is the game's frame rate. This is locked to 30 FPS, and that is true of most of the Everybody's Golf series, but there's something very different between those and this Switch version here. So if we were to look back at the PlayStation 4 version of Everybody's Golf, on standard PS4, this game was locked at 30 frames per second. PlayStation 4 Pro introduced a 60 frames per second option, but that's not really the point. This series has quite often been 30 FPS. But when hitting the ball, the gauge is usually 60 frames per second. So here it is in Everybody's Golf on the PS4, we're playing at 30 FPS, but the gauge is still 60 FPS. And then going back to the Vita game, this is a 30 frames per second game, but again, the gauge is 60 frames per second. That is very far from the case on Switch. This is a 30 FPS gauge, and that makes it increasingly harder to actually make these shots. I'm now very used to the PlayStation 5 version of this game, having spent hours in it now, and I'm having to unlearn all that timing muscle memory I have because things just don't work this way anymore. Your window now for making this shot is essentially twice as small as it used to be. I am messing up far more shots than usual. And in this example here, I'm just trying to putt at full strength, but I keep missing the window and having to start again just continuously because it's actually really hard to hit exactly where you want it to go. That's not to say you can't adjust to this timing. With enough practice, you'll definitely start to get a knack for it, but it really shouldn't be this way. And even with that practice, Switch players are still at a major disadvantage compared to PlayStation 5 and Steam. It's just not very fun to play the game like this. But how about the performance in general? Is this at least a stable 30 FPS? And I am at least happy to say that on Switch 2, it absolutely is. It doesn't really drop frames, this maintains a stable 30 FPS, so even if the gauge is locked at 30, it's not going to be dipping below that like it sometimes does on PlayStation 5 around 45 FPS. And to replicate that exact same weather conditions, exact same course as PlayStation 5, we are still holding 30 frames per second, so at least this is more stable, even if just hitting the ball is way harder. But that's Nintendo Switch 2. This may be a Switch 1 game regardless of the platform you play on, but Switch 2 gets an inherent hardware boost. Switch 1, the story isn't quite so pretty. Now, I suppose the good news first. The performance, most of the time, doesn't affect your actual gameplay. You see, when hitting the ball right here, the frame rate stays steady, but as soon as the ball is hit, which again granted is out of your control, the game does drop around 8 to 10 frames per second, and you feel that judder every time. It does not look good. It really is not passable. It doesn't tend to trigger drops when you're right by the hole, but anything further out is definitely going to plummet the frame rate. Now, matching PlayStation 5's problem area gives you scenarios like this, where the game's running at around 25 frames per second, making it very hard to hit the ball, even harder than usual. It's really not very good. And this is a massive shame because to me, Everybody's Golf is largely a portable franchise. Most of my time spent in this series has been on PSP and PS Vita, and those are wonderful, wonderful memories I wanted to continue on Switch, but this version of the game just really isn't it. This should have been a fantastic multi-platform debut, but instead we have a version I really can't recommend. And the PlayStation 5 version is by no means technically fantastic, but at least playing at 60 FPS with that 60 FPS gauge makes it very playable, most of the time, apart from these scenarios. But this should be an easy fix, right? The Switch version has a 3GB update, but that does nothing to alleviate these problems. What there should be is a Switch 2 version, a Switch 2 edition. Or if they can't do that, put a 60 FPS toggle in the options and hope that Switch 2 fixes it. But at the very least, there should be a 60 FPS gauge. It's been done before, the franchise is kind of known for it now, but this version doesn't do it for whatever reason. Anyway, I really can't recommend Everybody's Golf Hot Shots on the Switch. I mean, it's cool holding the box because it's just nice that this thing exists on Nintendo, but the game itself performs so poorly that in its current state, you really shouldn't buy it. It's better on PlayStation 5 and Steam by a lot. Anyway, thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time. Bye, everyone.
Deep breaths, girlie.
The terrain's perfectly flat. Looks like a slice shot. That was pretty good.